All right, welcome back. We're looking at the clamped up, ready for the top shim to be put on, top plate of the can billet here. You can see on the sides there, outside of the pattern elements, I've added some just ripped strips of plain 1080 bar just to contain the top and bottom edges of the billet, keep more oxygen out. I got the end caps fit up tight. Everything's clamped and then tapped together more to take up any space, and I dusted just a little bit of 1084 powder in the tops of anything that looked like a tiny little gap. So now we're pretty much ready to put that top shim on that you'll see here in the next clip. And then we're just going to start tacking it up. Now, here I'm actually tacking up the billet a little bit so I can take the side clamps off and get some of the clamps out of the way so that I can then put the top of the can on. But I've got to have the sides tacked up and tacked to the bottom of the can. It's a flat can orientation. I call it like tray type mosaic. Some people call it canoe. I think that sounds dumb. To me it's just a tray type mosaic, or like a mono tile. It allows you to basically put anything in there that you want, as long as it's fit well together. And you're not going to be making, a big loaf and getting several blades out of it. This is just for more detailed kind of bespoke single tile blade compositions. But it really opens up a big range of possibility. You can see I'm just putting little tacks here back and forth. Not having too much heat in one area at once, and trying to balance cooling and distortion forces against each other so I don't get my can trying to pull apart in one direction too much. And what I'm really wanting is for all the tacks to be gradually pulling everything together even a little bit farther than the clamps did. So now I got all the sides tacked to the bottom of the can, and then I've got all the corners tacked together to each other. So now I can take some clamps off. Then I can put the side clamps back on, but take the end clamps off. So now I can put the top of the flat can on there. My camera just wants to keep auto-focusing every time I move around it too much. Yep, here goes the top of the can. Now the sides are 1080, the end caps are 1080, and then the big flat bottom and top of this tray type can are 15N20. And it's nice to use a hardenable alloy like 15N20 because unlike mild steel, it won't suck carbon out of the surface of the billet inside the can. So everything inside the can stays high carbon. Plus I have a lot of 15N20 laying around, and so I just plasma cut it to size. Grind the edges so it welds well. And then I have nice clean material to build a can out of. Now I'm just going to tack the lid on using the same sort of considerations. Not too much heat in one place at a time. Balance tacks against each other. We don't want any part of this thing pooching out and creating a loose area in the can. And I'm actually going to fully weld it all up. But I start with tacks. Because if you know anything about arc welding, you know that if you just don't tack ahead of yourself and just try to full weld an entire seam, it's going to open up ahead of you and bad warps are going to happen. And here I've actually fully welded all the way around it with MIG. Tops, bottoms, sides, back. And then I've ground most of the MIG off, so I left a little filler material. I went I made it really fast so it didn't penetrate a lot, just enough. Didn't build up a lot of filler, ground most of the filler off. You can see a vent hole in the end there where I didn't finish that weld, and that is on purpose so that gases can escape the inside of the billet. Otherwise, sometimes it'll blow up like a balloon. I also put a little bit of oil inside the billet right before I finished welding it shut so that that oil will burn when the billet comes up to temp, consume any remaining oxygen inside, and then the resulting exhaust gases can escape through that little vent hole. So I should get a very inert atmosphere inside and a little positive pressure, but instantly relieved. And that gets you a good forge weld. And we're going into the fire. Now, I'm going into the fire before the forge has heated all the way up, because I want the billet to come up to heat with the forge. That means by the time everything is up to heat together, the billet will be more thoroughly preheated. That also means that that comparatively thin material that the can is made out of won't heat up so badly ahead of the inside of the billet, and that way it won't expand and the interior contents get all loose before they catch up and expand when the heat reaches them and then make them tight in the can again, if that makes sense. You can see we're heating up here on the PID. And we're going to give it a good soak before we take it out. Let it get up to temp. Here it's good and hot, and it's been sitting in there at temp for about 10 minutes. We're putting it on them big flat dies, and we're just patting it very quickly, alternating between the sides and the flats, both sides. We don't want to hit it too much from one direction. We're just trying to consolidate right now. Don't do too much from one direction or it'll pooch the welds open. It's like you're trying to stick together a snowball out of relatively poor snow for the task. You need to be delicate at first. Then you can start applying some pressure when it has ceased wanting to crumble. Here's a second heat. Again, we soaked it for about 5 minutes at temperature in the forge before this heat. And we're taking short heats. We're still at a welding heat when we put it back in the forge. More or less, you don't want to be forging down below a welding heat when it's still in a delicate stage in the first 2 or 3 heats with a billet this complex. These are light blows. We're trying not to induce any distortion. Just pack things together and stick them. At this point I could tell it was starting to feel more solid under the hammer though, and it was looking good. The can looked good. That little short handle tends to get pretty hot. After this I broke down and bought a bunch more number 5 rebar to make newer, longer handles with. They get shorter and shorter, and then after a while you just gotta buy more stock. Now this is the 3rd heat, so I'm starting to come at it from more of a drawing orientation and really put the boots to it a little bit more and start stretching length. And if there's anything remaining unconsolidated towards the core, this increased pressure will knock it together. A little bit of tip tap at the end to straighten it out. I wanted to be very careful because I'm forge welding this but also bringing it to a dimension. I needed to leave it pretty thick. Here's another shot from the iPhone. The battery on my bigger camera died, so I had to use what I had on hand. This is it's pretty much all welded and drawn out at this point. I gave it a really good soak the last time to get grain growth throughout the billet, crossing what were formerly boundaries and creating more homogeneity within the grain structure of the steel. Aging the welds is another way to put that. Here I'm putting a gauge block up next to it to see how close I am to size. Pretty close there. Now here's the last step of the first stage of the billet. I'm putting a curve in following the edge because I want my composite edge bar to follow what the edge profile of the big Bowie blade will be. The whole pattern will curve to follow the edge, and then I will cut the clip point off. Just knocking it flat again. Got to get it nice and straight because I don't want to have to surface grind very much off to get it flat. And it was looking good. Stay tuned for the next episode. It's getting exciting. Thanks for watching.